Hey everybody, my name is Alan Stanton. I'm the Executive Director of the Turner Center at Martin Methodist College. A couple weeks ago, we held a webinar for our rural congregations throughout Tennessee and the southeastern jurisdiction. We had people from all over the United States join us on that call. And we were asked to do some more webinars and produce more resources. So I wanted to invite people who are helping us think through different strategies of leadership during this COVID-19 pandemic. So today we have Mark House with us to help us think through organizational thinking and leading through the neutral zone and leading through times of uncertainty. So Mark, I'm going to let you introduce yourself if that's all right.
Sure. Thanks, Alan. I appreciate the offer to come and talk. And we've worked together in the past. I'm an executive coach, but before that I was in industry and certainly went through lots of big change initiatives, which is where I was introduced to the model we're going to talk through today. And I think it's a particularly important time to think about the language that you're going to hear and kind of what's happening with the parishioners and yourself as ministers, so you understand what's happening in the world around you and you've got some abilities to adapt to that. So that's what we're going to focus on today.
Awesome. So Mark, one of the things that we've talked a lot about and one of the things that you teach about regularly is this idea of a neutral zone. Can you just kind of give a brief overview of what that is and where that fits into our current situation?
Yeah, sure. This is taken from a book by William Bridges, which talks about transitions. And what he says is really change is an event that happens. And so in this particular crisis, there's not a specific event, but sort of everybody started realizing coronavirus is going to change everything. And then transitions has three phases. There's endings, and then there's the neutral zone, and then there's the new beginnings. And endings is literally what it sounds like. Something has ended. So as soon as the coronavirus started to be in everything we were doing, lots of things changed. Like suddenly, boom, college students had to go home. And that is literally the same as grief, because you're grieving for what was and you're trying to grapple with, okay, what is happening around us? And structure, particularly to Methodists, if you think about it, this is particularly difficult because we're used to structure and discipline. A lot of that has been called into question. Just going literally to a church building now is something we can't do. So endings is mostly about dealing with what you have lost. The next phase, neutral zone, is actually getting into the area where, okay, I know this has ended, but now what? Like, what decisions can I make? Who makes decisions? Who communicates what? And there's some particular things you can do, but there's also some issues you can run into in the neutral zone.
So why is this pandemic a neutral zone? I think, for me, I think about neutral zones. Sometimes they're natural and they kind of emerge, and sometimes they're sort of artificially created, like when I'm leading through a new project at my office or when I'm leading a new initiative in the church. What makes this particular thing a neutral zone, and how is it similar or different to other types of neutral zones?
So again, a lot of my expertise is in corporate, right? And so in corporations, typically there's a big change. So like you reorganize, right? Or in the church, you get a new minister, right? And so there's an event. So we know we're getting a new minister, and then you go through this, and then there's a true new beginning. The new person shows up, right? I think what's particularly difficult right now is there's no clear new beginning. Like we don't know, like we know now we have to stay home till April 30th, but that may or may not happen. It may be sooner, it may be later. And then we don't actually know what's going to happen at April 30th, like what will literally be there. So it's sort of a protracted, there's like no new beginning, right? And so the part of the neutral zone is helping people move from what they've lost into what's happening in the future. And since that future piece is less defined, it makes the neutral zone even more disorienting because you don't really even know what you can control. Now, I have some good news, which if you want to go there, the one thing that I've seen has been most helpful to me and also to a bunch of people that I'm working with is the new beginning is very personal. And I think if you can think through from your own perspective, what endings, what have you lost that you think, okay, I need to say goodbye to that, like understanding control and what you've been able to control. And then starting the part of the neutral zone is starting to think about, there were some things in the past I didn't really like always being on, like always having to do things. And not having time for exercise or not having time for my family. And so the neutral zone is literally helping you move from that grief into the possibilities of what you can be doing differently.
How important are relationships and maintaining relationships during this period?
It's critically important. The one nice thing is most everybody's available, so you can reach out and reconnect. I've reconnected with literally tens of people I haven't talked to in years. Through this Zoom platform, we've had 2 family meetings with my extended family, which one of them we had people in Spain and people in Oakland and every time zone in between, and all 25 people showed up. And so the last family reunion we had with that many people was never, because always somebody had some conflict. But for this one, everybody showed up because everybody wanted to see everybody. So that's one of the things. I think these relationships are critical. I thought it'd be a one-time event. At the end of that call, everybody said, let's do it next week. And I'm like, okay. So we did it yesterday. And okay, guess what? We're going to do it next week. And so we're now opting in for more connections and more understanding. I think that's going to be critically important.
What are some common mistakes that you see leaders making while they're navigating through this, this neutral period or this uncertain period?
The most important thing is to not speculate. And that's where I see people really make mistakes. And so during endings, they'll say things like, well, you just need to get over it. Well, that's not helpful and actually is not going to happen. Some people will not get over it. So in the corporate work that I do, literally 30% of the people often will not make it through to the new beginning. They will exit the organization. They will go in a different direction. They will just opt out. And the worst part is some of those 30% are the people you actually need over here. And so when I'm talking to people about doing change and they're talking about, we're having this huge turnover and it's like 20%, I'm like, well, you're doing really well. They're like, what? I'm like, no, that's actually above average. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is, to your point, connect with people, but don't talk, right? Because they need to talk, and so they need to tell you where they are, and you need to let them talk to you. And so the expectation of a leader is you've got to go in and make everybody feel calm. That's not talking. It's actually listening. And in that process, you can actually tell where people are. So if they're really talking about things they've lost, they're clearly in endings, right? Then there's some people that are already, well, you know what, we've always wanted to do a virtual Zoom call. So, we can reach people that are not here. An example I talked about is our minister happens to be trapped in Alabama. Guess what? No problem. We can have him on our call with us, even though we're all up in Northern Virginia. So there's possibility, and you hear it in people's language. I think the other thing that you typically run into as a leader is this expectation that I have to get to some new beginning. And I think right now trying to change things is not going to be easy because people are already uneasy, and trying to give them the illusion that a new answer for the future is really complicated.
You're talking about like this kind of turnover and making sure you're listening to people. And I'm wondering how much of that is related to people's sense of having control.
Yes.
Because now we're in this period where like, I could control my calendar. I could get up and go to work. I knew when I had meetings somewhere. Now me and my wife are both, we're parenting a toddler at home and trying to both work from home. So like we've lost sort of the things that we could control about our day-to-day lives. Are people, how do you mitigate for that? How do you help people feel like they have a sense of control even when, they might not?
So let me use you as an example. So the language that you used is literally classic ending zone language, because I used to control my calendar, and now I need to figure out kind of what we can do differently. So you're moving into neutral zone, and neutral zone now is, and now we've tried to figure out a way where we're parenting a toddler and we're both working. So we're having to divide up the Wi-Fi. Okay, so this is another good example of neutral zone, right? You're setting up temporary structures. This may or may not continue, but for now, let's just assume you get the morning Wi-Fi, she gets the evening Wi-Fi, whatever, right? And you try that. So that's a temporary structure that gives you the illusion of structure that you used to have before the event. It's not necessarily implied it's going to continue into the new beginning, although it might, right? So that's kind of the structural piece of the neutral zone. The relationship piece of the neutral zone is, I think, in this particular change, we're all becoming more connected with the real person that's on the other side of this conversation. So I had a coaching conversation with a woman last week, and she had a 1-year-old on her shoulder the whole call, right? Crying, burping, whatever. And so I had to be aware of being present enough that I could be a good coach, but also present enough as a human being that she is also a mom, right?
Right.
And so she was navigating this. And I think that's part of the new beginning that we may see, is that there's a more real connection with people. There's much less of this, my calendar runs me. It's like, no, I am going to now take control. So that's back to the new beginning for each of us personally, is to rethink what we want this to now be for us.
Yeah, you made me remember last week when I was on a Zoom call, and it was time for me to present some research we had been doing. And that was the moment my wife was actually in the office, because she's the admissions director and has to actually come in sometimes. And that was the moment where my 2-year-old daughter decided to pull off all of her clothes and hop on my lap in a diaper and say, "I want to see your friends." And if you know me, that is not the standard of professionalism that I usually live into. So that was a new beginning for me.
Right. I mean, it's exactly it. I mean, and I think that's back to, I think pastors and laity are all struggling with what's the new normal, right? And I don't think any of us know. And I would just say, particularly to leaders, don't rush it. That's the one mistake I see everyone consistently make. They'll say things like, it's going to be better. Actually, we don't know that. It's going to be different. That we do know, right? And it's up to us to figure out what does better actually look like. But I mean, I was talking to a person who's going to have to lay off 5 people at the end of this week, right? And it's a natural human thing to say it's going to be better. It's not going to be better for those people, right? And so understanding as a leader that you're speaking not just for yourself, but for the organization that you're in, that's always complex.
Yeah. So when you're in this period, if you're a leader and you're trying to make decisions, you have all these different voices weighing in. How do you balance those different voices when you're making a decision?
You're probably not going to like this answer, but as I tell people, if you have a good board of directors structure around you before this, now it's going to pay off. And if you don't, you're going to get in trouble, right? So I think it's a time where good teams get great and mediocre teams go terrible. And so I think as you're trying to step into the new beginning, part of the neutral zone is recognizing, you know what, there are some voices that I've been listening to that have not been helpful, and I need to end that. And so that's part of letting go and grieving that, and then realizing, okay, well, I need to determine some better voices, or maybe listen to my own instincts, right? I think this is another issue, is that ministers have some instincts that often are overridden by the laity that think they're smarter. Mm-hmm. Maybe not, right? And I think that's the hard part for leaders, is balancing all these different voices.
So it's a trick between giving people the opportunity to feel like they're being heard and to make them be heard, but also not letting all those voices overwhelm, so that you can still make a decision with your team.
You just said something I think is really important to reemphasize, which is in the neutral zone, people need to be heard. That does not mean they necessarily have to have their opinions in the decision. Many times, if you just let people say, here's what I think would be helpful, and you end up then deciding in a different way, they're okay because they were at least heard, right? And so this whole idea of just listening, I mean, you've worked with me for years. Listening is, I think, the most important leadership skill.
Should pastors and church leaders be setting goals during this time? And what are those goals?
Make it to tomorrow. I mean, seriously, this is sort of a convoluted mix of crisis management, crisis communication, and change management all rolled up into one big thing, right? So change management, recognize where people are, endings, neutral zone, new beginning. Crisis management is just stay present, and crisis communications is understanding what you can and cannot do, right? So again, until the new beginning is clear, you can't really make specific goals, but you can make incremental goals. So our church, for example, wasn't ready to do synchronous services, like us all be online and all see us together. But we were able to do an online synchronous coffee hour. And so we all got together. We literally had every family unit represented, which that never happens at church, because we all wanted to see each other, right? And so we were all able to see each other on Zoom. We all did prayer requests, et cetera, and then we all disconnected, and then we were able to listen to the service all completely different, right? So understanding that that's going to work for a bit. So again, a neutral zone temporary structure. Next week, we're going to try and do slightly more synchronous next week. So I think an incremental approach to goals would be what I would recommend.
What's your starting place for all this? One of the things I kind of hear underneath all of this is toying with different values and the principles that you hold as an organization. So how do you pick out the things that you want to use as foundation for growth during this time?
That's a really good question. I mean, it's sadly, the answer is almost exactly the same as what you asked about with stakeholders, is if you're already clear on your values as a leader and as an organization, now is when it really shows up, because you know how to steer. Right. And if not, you're lost, right? And so I went through a series of crisis management situations which really forced me to understand my own values. How do I lead? How do I understand? How do I articulate and listen to people well in these times of crisis? And so I have sort of a playbook that I know how to do. So that's what happened with me. 2 weeks ago, I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm turning off the TV because it's not helpful. And I kind of know how to do this, right? And so now I've been able to step into that. And I think there's sort of a reality check of what am I about? Why am I doing this? And if you've got that clarity, then it's okay. And then here's how I'm going to step into this.
So, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so you can tell me if this is wrong. One of the things that a church might use this time for is just to sort of rediscover who they are and what their values and virtues are as an organization.
Yeah. I mean, again, from my corporate world experience, again, I always come back to endings, right? There's things that have not been going well for a long time. You're going to end some stuff. You might as well try to figure out, this is not paying off. We need to say goodbye to that. We just don't have the bandwidth for it, right? So one of the practices that I used to do when I go into troubled organizations is we would do a start list, a keep list, and a stop list. And what was unique about the approach I took is the stop list had to be twice as long, because otherwise you have no capacity for any of this stuff over here. So as much as you'd like to do new things, like we're doing this Zoom thing, right?
Right.
Are we going to keep doing it forever? Probably not. It's a temporary thing, but at least understanding, okay, that means we need to not do something else. What is that, right? So I think that conversation of clarifying what's within your scope now is important.
That's helpful. So this is my last question for you. As a layperson, I think sometimes we pastors don't always value the voice of the laity in the church. What is something that you want pastors to understand about your life in the church right now?
That's a great question. So I'll use myself as an example, right? So I know how to run Zoom, right? So that's a talent I can bring to the table. And I realized that we were not connecting as a church, and we probably weren't going to for a while. So I reached out to the pastor and I said, do you want to try this? And he said, yes, do that, right? So I think that there's a capacity building piece of this, which is don't feel like every decision has to be your own. Feel that you're going to try something. I think just declaring that you're in the neutral zone. We don't actually know what the heck is happening. Well, we're going to try some stuff and see if it works, right? My particular pastor is very open in that way, and it's kind of the way he is. Back to values, that's just been the way this church has been run for a while, and so we're all in that season. So I think there's untapped capacity that's in the laity. I think the other thing is this is an unbelievably good time to minister to people, because people are really hurting, right? It's really personal now, and so be available for that type of conversation, I think, because I think that's going to happen a lot more.
Yeah, a friend of mine wrote an essay and we'll put it in the description, the 10 things to think about during this time, and one of them really kind of hit home, which was people who don't normally need pastoral care are going to need pastoral care.
Yes.
And I hadn't really thought about that that's kind of a mission right now for the whole community, is that pastoral care component.
Yeah. I mean, I've done some reading, and you probably know way more about this than I do, but one of the things that helped the Christian church grow in the 300-400 era was we stepped into the plague, right? Christians would go in and minister to people when everybody else was running away, because we knew we had salvation. And so while life was important, it wasn't the be-all, end-all, right? And this, I don't want to make this sound overly dramatic, but I think there's a great opportunity here, because there's a bunch of people that are completely lost. Everything that they knew has been blown up. Okay, well, what are you living for? What are your values? And we certainly see that.
Awesome. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. And if anybody wants to reach out, or is there contact information or a website they can go to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can reach me at empoweringleaders.com, and my email is mhouse@empoweringleaders.com. Feel free to email me. I'm a pretty chatty emailer, and I'd be happy to jump on a Zoom call if people have questions or want to follow up on it.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Have a great rest of your day.